What happens when a powerful CEO, consumed by ambition, faces the harsh reality of her past mistakes? In this gripping story, Rebecca Sterling, a self-made business titan, has built an empire from the ground up. But at what cost? After a public humiliation of a young waitress, Rebecca's world begins to unravel, forcing her to confront her arrogance, the lives she's impacted, and the ethical choices she's made. Just as she starts to redeem herself, a shocking scandal from her company's past threatens to destroy everything she's worked for. Will Rebecca rise above her mistakes and reclaim her integrity, or will her empire crumble under the weight of her past decisions? Comment below where you're watching from, and let us know what you think Rebecca's ultimate fate will be. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the twists and turns in this powerful journey of redemption and second chances. Rebecca Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, the skyline of the bustling city stretching endlessly before her. The setting sun bathed the glass towers in a golden hue, casting long shadows over the streets below. She was high above it all, literally and figuratively, a self-made woman who had clawed her way to the top of Sterling Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company that bore her name and reflected her unrelenting ambition. Her reflection in the glass was as polished and flawless as the image she projected to the world. In her tailored navy suit and delicate silver jewelry, she radiated power. At 42, Rebecca was the picture of success, CEO of one of the most prominent real estate conglomerates in the country, the owner of properties that span from luxury hotels to state-of-the-art office buildings. She had outlasted competitors, fended off takeovers, and built an empire from nothing. And yet, as she stared down at the shimmering lights of the city, there was a faint, unfamiliar tug in her chest. Doubt. It was fleeting, barely noticeable, but it was there. In the long, quiet moments after her meetings, when her assistants were gone and the offices around her were empty, doubt would slip in, uninvited, and linger in the edges of her thoughts. She would shake it off. Of course, she had no time for doubts or second-guessing. Yet lately the doubts came more frequently, and she found herself questioning things she hadn't questioned in years. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to reality. She turned from the window, shaking off the unease that had crept in, and walked back to her desk. The heavy oak desk was spotless, every item neatly arranged, just like her life. No clutter, no distractions. Her assistant Emily had ensured that Rebecca's work environment reflected the same precision and control she expected from herself. Glancing at the message on her phone, Rebecca allowed herself a small smile. It was from Tom Caldwell, the man who ran Caldwell's Bistro, the most exclusive and sought-after restaurant in the city. His confirmation for the evening's dinner had come through, and Rebecca felt a ripple of satisfaction. Tonight was going to be important not just for her, but for the future of Sterling Enterprises. Tom Caldwell was not just a restaurateur. He was a man of influence, deeply connected to the city's elite. His family had been a cornerstone of the community for generations, their dining establishments frequented by politicians, celebrities, and the wealthiest patrons. He was an old-school businessman, someone who valued loyalty, tradition, and reputation above all else. And tonight, Rebecca intended to solidify a partnership with him that would elevate her company to new heights. The deal on the table was a high-profile project. Sterling Enterprises was planning to build a new luxury hotel downtown, and Caldwell's name attached to it as a partner would make the venture an instant success. Rebecca had carefully orchestrated every detail of this partnership, knowing it would ensure her dominance in the market for years to come. But Tom was not an easy man to win over. He valued relationships and trust more than profit margins, and Rebecca knew that tonight's dinner would be her final opportunity to convince him that she was the right partner. "Mrs. Sterling, the car is ready." Emily's voice came from the doorway, gentle but firm. Rebecca nodded, slipping her phone into her bag and giving one last glance at her reflection in the mirror behind her desk. Her blonde hair was pulled into a sleek chignon, her makeup flawless, highlighting the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the cool blue of her eyes. Everything was in place. "Thank you, Emily. Make sure everything at the office is in order while I'm gone." "Of course, Miss Sterling," Emily replied, her tone as polished as Rebecca's image. Rebecca walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor, a sound that echoed through the vast, empty office space. As she passed her assistant, she gave a curt nod of approval. Emily had been with her for 5 years, always efficient, always reliable. Rebecca never considered what went on in Emily's personal life or how she managed to balance the workload Rebecca demanded. The details of her employees' lives weren't her concern. They were there to support her vision, to make sure Sterling Enterprises remained at the top. She rewarded loyalty, but she expected unwavering dedication in return. The ride to Caldwell's Bistro was smooth, the city flashing by in a blur of lights and shadows. Rebecca sat in the back of her town car, checking emails and reviewing the finer points of the proposal she planned to discuss with Tom. Her chauffeur, James, knew the city like the back of his hand, navigating through the traffic with practiced ease. She didn't thank him as they arrived, stepping out of the car without so much as a glance in his direction. She had long since learned that gratitude was unnecessary when she paid people to do their jobs well. Caldwell's Bistro was a sight to behold, a modern masterpiece of architectural elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist decor, and soft, warm lighting that bathed the restaurant in an inviting glow. Rebecca strode through the entrance with the same confidence that had taken her from a small-town girl to a corporate titan. "Good evening, Miss Sterling," said Charles, the maitre d', bowing slightly as he greeted her. "It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Your table is ready, as per your request." Rebecca smiled, but there was little warmth behind it. "Thank you, Charles. I'll be dining with Mr. Caldwell and a few guests. Make sure everything is perfect." "Of course, ma'am," he replied, leading her through the restaurant toward the private dining room at the back. The room was just as she had expected. Elegant, with soft lighting that made the polished mahogany table and plush leather chairs shine. A delicate centerpiece of white lilies graced the middle of the table, and the finest china and crystal were set for the evening's meal. It was a display of wealth and refinement, the kind that made people feel important just by sitting there. And that was exactly what Rebecca wanted. Tonight, she needed to remind Tom Caldwell and the other guests that she was someone who could deliver on promises, someone worth trusting. Her guests arrived shortly after, each of them high-profile figures in the city's business world, but none as important as Tom Caldwell, who entered with an air of quiet authority. He was a man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a calm, measured demeanor that belied the power he held in the city's most influential circles. He greeted Rebecca with a polite smile, though there was a hint of wariness in his eyes. "Rebecca," Tom said, extending his hand, "thank you for organizing this dinner." "My pleasure, Tom. I'm looking forward to discussing how we can move forward with the project." They exchanged pleasantries as the other guests settled into their seats, the air filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and murmured conversations. Rebecca made sure to steer the conversation toward light topics at first: business anecdotes, stock market trends, and the upcoming election. She knew how to charm, how to make people feel at ease, but her mind was always calculating, always anticipating the right moment to make her move. As the first course was served, a young waitress approached the table, her steps careful and her posture straight. She wore the standard black and white uniform of the restaurant staff, her name tag reading Jenny Caldwell. Rebecca barely glanced at her as she poured wine into their glasses, too focused on maintaining the flow of conversation with Tom and the other guests. But as Jenny leaned in to refill Rebecca's glass, her hand slipped slightly, causing a small splash of wine to land on the pristine tablecloth. It wasn't much, barely noticeable, but to Rebecca, it was an unacceptable breach of perfection. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, and she set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold and cutting. "Is this how you're trained here? To spill wine on the table?" Jenny froze, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it up right away." Rebecca waved a dismissive hand. "Just bring us a new cloth, and try not to make any more mistakes." The other guests exchanged glances, some looking uncomfortable, others amused by Rebecca's sharpness. Tom's expression remained neutral, but Rebecca could sense that he had taken note of the exchange. As Jenny hurried away to fetch a new cloth, Rebecca leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She had no tolerance for incompetence, especially not in an establishment like Caldwell's Bistro, where everything was supposed to be perfect. If Jenny couldn't handle the simple task of pouring wine, she didn't deserve to work there. "Apologies for the interruption," Rebecca said smoothly, turning her attention back to the table. "Now, about the hotel project." What Rebecca didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that tonight would mark the beginning of a downfall she never saw coming. Her world, built so meticulously on power, control, and ambition, was about to unravel in ways she couldn't predict. And the young woman she had just humiliated was far more important than Rebecca could have imagined. As the evening continued, Rebecca remained blissfully unaware that her fate had already shifted. But soon the tables would turn, and Rebecca would face the consequences of a lifetime of arrogance. Rebecca felt in control, as always. She was an expert at navigating social events like these, managing to make everyone around the table feel important while simultaneously reminding them of her position as a powerhouse in the business world. The private dining room hummed with soft conversations as the second course was served, and Rebecca was already mentally preparing for the perfect moment to introduce the main topic of the evening, the partnership with Tom Caldwell. Tom, though reserved, was participating in the conversation, sharing stories from his years running Caldwell's Bistro. His reputation for being discerning was well earned. He chose his business partners carefully and wasn't someone easily impressed by flashy presentations or hollow promises. He respected legacy, values, and people, traits that Rebecca had learned to mirror in her interactions with him. Rebecca watched the room carefully, her sharp blue eyes scanning each guest's face as they engaged in idle chatter, ensuring everyone felt attended to. It was a delicate balance, making Tom feel like the focal point while keeping the others engaged in just the right way, so no one felt left out. She had mastered this over the years, creating a reputation for herself not just as a business leader, but as someone who knew how to work a room. "Tom," she said smoothly, as the conversation turned to real estate trends, "the project we discussed last month, Sterling's next luxury hotel, has generated a lot of interest already. With your restaurant at the heart of it, I think it'll be a game changer for both of us." Tom regarded her quietly for a moment. He wasn't a man to jump at opportunities just because they were lucrative. His concern was always about integrity, about whether a partnership aligned with his values. "I have no doubt it would be successful, Rebecca," he replied, swirling the wine in his glass. "But success isn't always the most important thing. What matters to me is the long-term relationship with the kind of people I do business with." Rebecca nodded, carefully masking the impatience rising inside her. She knew Tom was testing her, as he always did. He was well aware of her track record, ruthless in business, uncompromising in negotiations. She needed to prove to him that she wasn't just about numbers, but about loyalty and trust, the very qualities Tom valued most. As Rebecca prepared to respond, the young waitress, Jenny Caldwell, returned to their table with the next bottle of wine. Rebecca barely registered her presence, too focused on Tom and the words she needed to say next. But once again, as Jenny poured the wine, her hand trembled slightly. The wine flowed too quickly, filling Tom's glass to the brim and splashing over the edge onto the tablecloth. This time, Rebecca's reaction was immediate. "Are you serious?" Rebecca's voice was sharp, slicing through the previously polite atmosphere of the room. She glared at Jenny, her eyes narrowing with disdain. "First you spill the wine, and now you overfill the glass? Are you trying to ruin this evening?" Jenny's face turned crimson, her hands trembling as she placed the bottle down, clearly mortified by her mistake. I'm so sorry, ma'am," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll clean it up right away." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms and staring Jenny down. "Maybe if you focused more on your job and less on whatever you're distracted by, you wouldn't be making such careless mistakes." The room fell silent. Some of the other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged awkward glances. Tom, however, said nothing, his expression carefully neutral as he watched the exchange unfold. Jenny quickly retrieved a cloth and began dabbing at the spilled wine, her hands shaking as she tried to clean up the mess. Rebecca watched her with cold disinterest. Her earlier composure now hardened into something much sharper. "Just bring us fresh clothes and make sure the rest of the evening goes smoothly," Rebecca said, her voice laced with impatience. "I expect better service from Caldwell's." Jenny nodded quickly and hurried out of the room, her shoulders hunched with humiliation. As she disappeared from view, Rebecca exhaled, shaking her head as if to rid herself of the annoyance. She turned back to Tom, attempting to regain the momentum of the conversation. "I apologize for that," she said, forcing a smile. "Now where were we?" Tom's face was impassive as he met her gaze. "I think," he said slowly, "we were discussing the importance of people in business. Wouldn't you agree?" Rebecca faltered for a moment, unsure of how to respond to the sudden change in his tone. There was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite read, that made her uncomfortable. But before she could address it, the moment passed, and Tom turned his attention back to the other guests, leaving Rebecca feeling slightly off balance. The rest of the dinner passed uneventfully, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, though she couldn't quite place it. By the time dessert was served, she was eager for the evening to end, certain that once she and Tom met privately, she could smooth over any concerns he had. Rebecca stood by the coat check, scrolling through her phone as her guests left the restaurant one by one. The dinner had gone well enough, despite the awkward interruption with Jenny, and now it was time for the real discussion to begin. One-on-one with Tom Caldwell. She had always thrived in situations like this, where she could leverage her charm and business acumen to close the deal. Her phone buzzed with a message from David Caldwell, Tom's younger brother and the co-owner of Caldwell's Bistro. He was joining them for a post-dinner drink, and Rebecca had always found David to be more direct than his older brother. Perhaps he could help her nudge Tom toward finalizing the partnership. She looked up just as Tom approached, his coat draped over his arm, and nodded politely. "Ready for a drink?" she asked, flashing him a confident smile. "Actually, Rebecca," Tom said, his voice low, "there's something I need to talk to you about first." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, feeling the slightest ripple of unease. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Before Tom could answer, David arrived, his expression unusually somber. He glanced between Rebecca and Tom, then cleared his throat. "I think we should have this conversation privately, Tom." Rebecca's unease deepened, but she nodded and gestured toward the nearby lounge where they could sit and talk. As they settled into the plush leather chairs, Rebecca prepared herself for the usual back and forth of negotiation. But when Tom spoke, his words were not what she expected. "Rebecca, do you know who Jenny is?" he asked, his tone even but laced with something unspoken. Rebecca blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. "Jenny?" she repeated, not understanding the point. "The waitress? I assume she works here, obviously. Why?" Tom and David exchanged a glance before Tom sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Jenny is my daughter." Rebecca's entire body went cold, her heart skipping a beat. "What?" she whispered, the shock evident in her voice. "Jenny's been working her way through different parts of the business," Tom continued, his gaze steady. "She insisted on learning every aspect of the restaurant from the kitchen to the front of house. She's not just a waitress, Rebecca. She's being groomed to take over the Caldwell family business." Rebecca's mouth went dry. Her mind raced back to the way she had spoken to Jenny earlier that evening, the harshness in her voice, the disdain in her words. And now, sitting across from Tom, she realized the enormity of her mistake. She hadn't just humiliated a waitress. She had publicly humiliated the daughter of the very man she was trying to impress. I didn't know," Rebecca stammered, feeling her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. "If I had known—" "It shouldn't matter," David interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "It shouldn't matter whether she's Tom's daughter or anyone else's. You treated her like she was beneath you." Rebecca felt a sharp pang of guilt in her chest, but she quickly tried to recover. "I was frustrated," she said, her voice faltering. "I didn't mean for it to come out that way. I was just—" Tom raised a hand, silencing her. "Rebecca, I've built my business on more than just profit margins. I value relationships, respect, and trust. And tonight I saw a side of you that makes me question whether this partnership is the right fit." Rebecca's heart plummeted. "Tom, I can fix this," she said quickly, leaning forward in her chair. "Please let me apologize to Jenny. Let me make this right. I don't want one misunderstanding to ruin everything we've been working toward." Tom studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. It's not just one misunderstanding, Rebecca. It's about how you treat people when no one's looking. And tonight I saw something I didn't like. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time in years, she felt powerless, truly powerless. The deal she had spent months working on, the partnership that was supposed to cement her company's dominance, was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Tom stood, his expression calm but resolute. "I'll think about it," he said, giving her one last look before turning to leave. "But for now, I think we need to take a step back." David followed suit, giving Rebecca a sympathetic nod as he left the room. And just like that, they were gone, leaving Rebecca alone in the lounge, the weight of her mistake crashing down on her. The next morning, Rebecca sat in her office, staring blankly at the city skyline. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white from the pressure. How had everything gone so wrong? How had she let a simple, careless interaction cost her so much? She had called Tom 3 times already, but each call had gone straight to voicemail. She had sent an email, offering her sincerest apologies and asking for a chance to meet and discuss the situation in person, but there had been no response. The silence was deafening. For the first time in her career, Rebecca felt like she was on the edge of losing something she couldn't control. Sterling Enterprises had weathered economic downturns, hostile takeovers, and fierce competition, but never had Rebecca faced a challenge like this, one that stemmed from her own behavior, her own arrogance. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was her assistant Emily calling from the front desk. "Ms. Sterling," Emily said, her voice hesitant, "I just got word that Tom Caldwell had officially canceled the meeting with the board this afternoon." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "Canceled?" she repeated, her voice strained. "Yes, he didn't give a reason, but, well, I thought you should know." Rebecca closed her eyes, the weight of the news sinking in. The deal was falling apart. What had been a sure thing, an opportunity to elevate Sterling Enterprises to new heights, was now slipping away, and it was all because of one moment of unchecked pride. "I see," Rebecca said quietly. "Thank you, Emily." As she hung up the phone, Rebecca leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling as the reality of the situation pressed down on her. This wasn't just a setback. This was a turning point, and for the first time in years, Rebecca wasn't sure how to fix it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rebecca went through the motions of her meetings and phone calls, but her mind was elsewhere, trapped in an endless loop of self-doubt and regret. She couldn't stop thinking about the look on Tom's face when he had told her they needed to take a step back. He had seen something in her, something he didn't like, and now that image of herself was haunting her. That night, Rebecca sat alone in her penthouse apartment, the city lights flickering through the glass windows like distant stars. She had always loved the view from up here, the way the city stretched out before her, vast and endless. It had made her feel powerful, invincible. But tonight, it only made her feel small. She walked over to the large bookshelf that lined one wall of her living room and pulled down an old photo album she hadn't looked at in years. As she flipped through the pages, memories from her past washed over her. Pictures of her younger self, bright-eyed and full of ambition, stared back at her. She had been so full of hope back then, so determined to make something of herself. But somewhere along the way, that hope had twisted into something else. Her ambition had become ruthless, her drive had turned into arrogance, and in her quest for success, she had forgotten the person she once was, the person who had started from nothing, who had believed in hard work and integrity. Rebecca closed the album, her hands shaking slightly as she set it aside. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to really look in the mirror to see the woman she had become, and she didn't like what she saw. She had hurt people. She had treated them as if they were disposable, just cogs in the machine she was building, and now it was all coming back to haunt her. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the empty apartment. The cracks in her carefully constructed facade were growing larger, and soon they would be impossible to ignore. Something had to change, but Rebecca wasn't sure if she was capable of it. She had spent so many years building walls, shielding herself from vulnerability, that the idea of tearing them down felt terrifying. But what choice did she have? If she wanted to save not only her company but herself, she would have to face the truth. The following week, Rebecca Sterling found herself back at Caldwell's Bistro, this time not as a confident power broker, but as someone desperate to make amends. She had called Tom Caldwell repeatedly over the past several days, leaving messages apologizing profusely for her behavior. When he finally agreed to meet her, she was both relieved and nervous, sensing that this might be her last chance to salvage the deal, and perhaps her reputation. It was early evening when she arrived at the restaurant, deliberately choosing a more modest look, a tailored dress, toned-down jewelry, and light makeup. She wanted to project humility, not the towering confidence she usually wore like armor. But as she walked through the grand entrance of Caldwell's Bistro, the familiar, elegant surroundings only heightened her anxiety. She had once felt invincible in this place. Now she felt exposed. Rebecca was ushered into a private booth where Tom waited, nursing a glass of red wine. He greeted her with a polite nod but made no attempt at warmth. His expression was unreadable, though Rebecca could sense that he was still weighing his opinion of her. She slid into the seat across from him, trying to maintain her composure. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Tom," Rebecca began, her voice softer than usual. "I know I've put you in a difficult position, and I want to start by saying how sorry I am." Tom set his wine glass down and folded his hands on the table. "I'm listening, Rebecca. Go ahead." Rebecca swallowed, feeling the weight of his measured tone. She had prepared for this moment, rehearsing her apology over and over again in her head. But now that she was sitting in front of him, the words felt inadequate. "I regret how I treated Jenny that night," Rebecca said, her voice steady but filled with genuine remorse. "I was stressed about the deal, and I let that cloud my judgment. I should never have spoken to her that way, regardless of who she is. I can see that now." Tom watched her carefully, his face betraying nothing. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Rebecca continued, "but I hope you'll give me the opportunity to prove that I'm not the person you saw that night. I'm committed to making things right, not just for Jenny, but for our partnership. I know what this deal could mean for both of us, and I want to show you that I'm serious about moving forward in a way that honors the values you hold dear." For a moment, Tom remained silent, considering her words. The silence stretched on, making Rebecca's heart race. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, his expression contemplative. "Rebecca, I appreciate your apology," he began slowly. "But this isn't just about that one incident. It's about something deeper, how you approach people, how you treat those around you when you think no one's watching. What I saw that night wasn't just a moment of frustration. It was a reflection of your character." Rebecca's chest tightened. She could feel the deal slipping away. "People like Jenny, people who work hard to make places like this run, they deserve respect," Tom continued, "not because of their family connections or their titles, but because they're human beings. I need to know that if we go into business together, you'll treat everyone involved with that same respect, whether they're serving wine or signing contracts." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. She knew that her behavior that night had been more than just a lapse in judgment. It had revealed a side of herself she wasn't proud of, a side that had become too comfortable dismissing those she deemed unimportant. "I understand," Rebecca said quietly. "You're right. I've spent too much time focused on the bottom line and not enough time considering the people behind it. I can't undo what I did, but I promise you, I'm working to change. I don't want to be that person anymore." Tom regarded her for a long moment, his gaze searching. "I want to believe you, Rebecca," he said finally, "but actions speak louder than words. Right now, I'm not convinced that you're ready to be the kind of partner I'm looking for." Rebecca's heart sank. She had feared this outcome but hoped she could somehow change his mind. "That doesn't mean I'm closing the door completely," Tom added, softening his tone slightly. "But before we move forward, I need to see real evidence that you've changed, not just in your business dealings, but in how you treat people." Rebecca nodded, though her disappointment was palpable. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself." I won't let you down. Tom stood, offering her a brief nod. We'll see. Take care, Rebecca. And with that, he turned and left the restaurant, leaving Rebecca alone in the dimly lit booth. She sat there for a long time, staring at the empty glass in front of her, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had come so close, only to realize that this wasn't just about securing a deal. It was about confronting the truth of who she had become. The next few weeks were a blur of damage control for Rebecca. Word of her failed meeting with Tom Caldwell spread through the business community faster than she had anticipated, and it wasn't long before whispers of her behavior at Caldwell's Bistro reached other influential figures. The city's elite had always thrived on gossip, and now Rebecca found herself at the center of it. Her board of directors, normally content to let Rebecca run things her way, began to express concern. Mark Turner, a senior member of the board, called an emergency meeting to discuss the future of the company, and Rebecca could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. As she entered the conference room at Sterling Enterprises, the tension in the air was palpable. Mark sat at the head of the table, his usual genial expression replaced by one of stern focus. The other board members exchanged wary glances, clearly uncomfortable with what was about to be discussed. Rebecca, Mark began, his voice measured but firm, we've heard some troubling things lately, specifically about your dealings with the Caldwell family and the fallout from that partnership. Rebecca forced herself to remain composed, though her insides churned with anxiety. The situation with Tom Caldwell is under control, she replied, her tone calm but tight. I've already apologized and taken steps to address the issue. Mark sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's not just about the Caldwell deal. This incident has raised questions about your leadership style, questions we can't ignore anymore. Rebecca blinked, caught off guard. My leadership style? What does that have to do with? It has everything to do with it, Mark interrupted, his voice growing firmer. The way you handled that situation, publicly humiliating someone in a high-profile restaurant, reflects poorly on this company. And from what we've been hearing, it's not an isolated incident. Employees here have expressed concerns as well. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. What employees? I've always run this company efficiently. Efficiently, yes, Mark said, cutting her off again. But at what cost? People feel alienated, undervalued, and now that perception is bleeding into our external relationships. You've built Sterling Enterprises into a powerhouse, but if you keep burning bridges, we're going to have a serious problem on our hands. The words hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain control over her company, her image, her life, but now it seemed as though everything was slipping out of her grasp. I can fix this, Rebecca said, her voice tight with emotion. I've worked too hard to let it all fall apart now. Mark studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. That's what we're hoping, Rebecca. But make no mistake, this is your last chance. You need to show us that you can change, that you can lead with respect and integrity. Otherwise, we're going to have to reconsider your position here. The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword over her head. Rebecca nodded, her throat tight. I understand, she said quietly. I'll do whatever it takes. As the meeting adjourned and the board members filed out of the room, Rebecca sat in her chair, staring down at her hands. She had always believed that power meant never having to apologize, never having to explain herself. But now that belief was crumbling beneath her, and for the first time, she wasn't sure how to rebuild. Later that day, after the board meeting, Rebecca returned to her office feeling drained. She sat at her desk, staring out at the city skyline, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She was supposed to be untouchable, invincible. Instead, she felt like the walls were closing in on her, and she didn't know how to stop it. A soft knock on the door broke her reverie. Her assistant Emily stepped into the office, holding a stack of papers in her arms. Rebecca barely acknowledged her presence, too lost in her own thoughts. Miss Sterling, Emily said cautiously, there's something I need to talk to you about. Rebecca sighed, rubbing her temples. Not now, Emily. I'm not in the mood for more bad news. But Emily didn't leave. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice firmer than Rebecca had ever heard it. Actually, Ms. Sterling, I think you need to hear this. Rebecca looked up, surprised by the change in her assistant's tone. Emily had always been quiet, unassuming, content to do her job without complaint. But now there was something different in her eyes, something determined. "What is it, Emily?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep the irritation out of her voice. Emily took a deep breath, her expression a mixture of nerves and resolve. "I've worked for you for 5 years, Mrs. Sterling," she began, "and in that time I've seen you accomplish amazing things. You've built an empire, and you've made this company one of the most powerful in the country. But I've also seen how you treat people." Rebecca frowned, her irritation deepening. "What are you talking about?" "You treat people like they're disposable," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "You dismiss their ideas, you belittle them, and you make them feel like they don't matter. That's not leadership, Mr. Sterling. That's fear, and it's starting to catch up with you." Rebecca stared at her, momentarily speechless. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. Certainly not Emily, the assistant who had always done her job without complaint. "I don't need a lecture," Rebecca snapped, her voice sharp. "You don't know what it takes to run a company like this." Emily didn't back down. "Maybe I don't," she admitted, "but I know what it takes to be a decent human being. And right now, Miss Sterling, that's what you're missing." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to lash out, to tell Emily that she had no idea what she was talking about. But deep down, something in her knew that Emily was right. Her success had come at a cost, and now she was paying the price. "You can still fix this," Emily said softly, her voice filled with quiet strength. "But you have to start by changing how you treat people. Otherwise, it's all going to fall apart." Rebecca didn't respond. She couldn't. The truth of Emily's words hit her harder than any business failure ever could. She had been so focused on climbing to the top that she had forgotten what it meant to lead with compassion, to connect with the people who had helped her get there. "I'll leave you to think about it," Emily said gently, turning to leave the office. But before she walked out the door, she paused and looked back at Rebecca. "For what it's worth, I believe you can change, Miss Sterling, but it's up to you to decide if you want to." As the door closed behind her, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. Emily's words echoed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had always prided herself on being tough, on never showing weakness. But now as she sat alone in her office, the reality of her situation hit her like a tidal wave. She had become the very thing she had once sworn never to be: a ruthless, arrogant leader who cared more about power than people. And if she didn't change, she would lose everything she had worked so hard to build. Rebecca knew what she had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. The next morning she sat at her desk, staring at the phone in front of her, wondering if she had the courage to make the call. She had spent years building walls around herself, shielding herself from vulnerability. But now those walls had become a prison, and the only way out was to confront the truth. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. The phone rang twice before it was answered. "Hello?" It was Jenny Caldwell, her voice calm but cautious. Rebecca's heart raced as she struggled to find the right words. "Jenny, it's Rebecca Sterling," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I wanted to talk to you, if you're willing." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Rebecca feared that Jenny might hang up. But then she heard a quiet sigh. "Okay," Jenny said, "I'm listening." Rebecca exhaled, feeling a small sense of relief. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice filled with sincerity. "Not just for what happened at the restaurant, but for how I treated you. I was wrong, and I want to make things right." Another pause. Rebecca could hear the hesitation in Jenny's voice when she finally spoke again. "I appreciate the apology," Jenny said slowly, "but it's going to take more than words to fix this." Rebecca nodded, even though Jenny couldn't see her. "I know. That's why I'm calling. I want to prove to you that I'm serious about changing. I want to do better, not just in business, but as a person." Jenny was quiet for a moment, then said, "What exactly are you offering?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "I want to help. I want to find a way to give back, to contribute to something meaningful. I heard about the mentorship program you and your family run for underprivileged youth. I'd like to get involved. If you'll have me." There was another long pause on the other end of the line. Rebecca held her breath, waiting for Jenny's response. Finally, Jenny spoke, her voice softer now. You really want to help? I do, Rebecca said earnestly. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can change. Jenny was silent for a few more seconds, and then, to Rebecca's surprise, she heard a small sigh of acceptance. Okay, Jenny said, if you're serious about this, I'll give you the chance. But remember, actions speak louder than words. Rebecca felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you, Jenny. I won't let you down. As they ended the call, Rebecca sat back in her chair, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. This was the beginning of something new, something that terrified her as much as it excited her. But if she was going to rebuild her life, she knew she had to start somewhere. And this time, she would do it the right way. Rebecca Sterling sat in her car outside the Riverside Youth Center, her fingers tapping nervously on the steering wheel. It was a modest building, red brick and ivy covered, nestled between a public library and a park. This was far from the high-end office towers and luxurious spaces Rebecca was used to, but she knew that what she was about to do was more important than any business deal or corporate meeting. This wasn't about profit margins or real estate ventures. This was about proving that she could be something other than the cold, calculating businesswoman the world, and perhaps she herself had come to believe she was. She was here because she had made a promise to Jenny Caldwell that she would help with the mentorship program for underprivileged youth. But more importantly, she was here to prove to herself that she could change. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, adjusting her coat. She had deliberately chosen a more casual outfit, opting for slacks and a simple blouse instead of her usual designer dresses and heels. She didn't want to intimidate anyone, least of all herself. Today was about listening, learning, and offering whatever help she could. As she approached the entrance, a wave of nervousness washed over her. For someone who had commanded boardrooms filled with powerful executives, this felt far more intimidating. Rebecca wasn't used to situations where she wasn't in control, and the uncertainty of what awaited her inside made her stomach churn. When she entered the center, the smell of worn carpet and old wood greeted her. The atmosphere was bustling but warm. Children and teenagers moved in and out of rooms, and volunteers worked with groups at small tables. There was an air of community here, a sense of purpose and belonging that Rebecca hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, she felt like a stranger. She spotted Jenny across the room, talking to a group of young students. Jenny's eyes flicked over to her, and Rebecca felt a pang of anxiety shoot through her. This wasn't going to be easy. Rebecca walked toward Jenny, her steps hesitant. When she reached her, Jenny looked up, her expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Rebecca," Jenny said, giving her a nod. "Glad you made it." Rebecca offered a small smile, feeling out of place in the vibrant, bustling center. "Thank you for having me, Jenny. I'm looking forward to helping out, however I can." Jenny's gaze was calm but evaluating. "We can always use an extra pair of hands. The kids here have been through a lot, so it's important to make sure they feel supported." Rebecca nodded. "I understand. I'm here to help." Jenny gestured toward a group of teenagers sitting at a round table in the corner of the room. "We're working on career planning today. These are the older kids getting ready to finish high school and trying to figure out what they want to do next. Why don't you start with them? They could use some guidance on building resumes and setting goals for the future." Rebecca swallowed her nerves and followed Jenny to the group. The teens looked up as they approached, and Rebecca could feel their curiosity and perhaps a bit of skepticism about her presence. She was an outsider here, and she knew that it would take time to earn their trust. "Everyone," Jenny said, addressing the group, "this is Rebecca Sterling. She's here to help you with some career planning today. She knows a lot about the business world, so make sure to ask her questions. I'll be over there if you need anything." As Jenny walked away, Rebecca took a seat at the table, the eyes of the teenagers watching her carefully. She offered them a small, uncertain smile. "Hi," Rebecca began, feeling awkward in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I'm Rebecca. I've been in the business world for a long time, so if you have any questions about careers, job applications, or anything like that, I'm here to help." One of the teens, a boy with glasses and a serious expression, raised his hand. "You run a big company, right?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, I do." "Sterling Enterprises." The boy, who introduced himself as Jamal, raised an eyebrow. So you're like really rich? Rebecca chuckled softly. I suppose you could say that, but it didn't happen overnight. I had to work hard to get where I was. Another teen, Mia, who sat with her arms crossed, chimed in. Yeah, but people like you don't understand what it's like for us. We don't have connections. We don't have rich families. It's not easy for us to get a break. Rebecca felt a pang of recognition. Mia's words reminded her of her own past, of the young woman she had been before success had hardened her. I didn't have a rich family either, Mia. I grew up in a small town, and my family didn't have much money. I had to work my way up from the bottom. Mia's eyes narrowed slightly. Yeah, but you got lucky, right? Not everyone can make it. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. It wasn't just luck, Mia. It was a lot of hard work, and yes, there were times when I got opportunities that others didn't. But I believe that no matter where you come from, you can create opportunities for yourself. And that's why I'm here, to help you figure out how to take those first steps. The room fell silent for a moment as the teens processed her words. Jamal spoke up again, his expression thoughtful. So how do we start? How do we get from where we are to where you are? Rebecca felt a sense of relief that the conversation was shifting in a more positive direction. The first step is figuring out what you're passionate about, what you want to do. Then you need to start setting small goals that will help you move in that direction. It doesn't happen all at once. It's about taking one step at a time. The conversation continued, and Rebecca found herself growing more comfortable as the teens opened up about their dreams and concerns. Mia wanted to be a social worker, but she was worried about the cost of college. Jamal was interested in starting his own tech business, but didn't know where to begin. Each of them had hopes and aspirations, but they also faced challenges that Rebecca knew would require more than just a few words of advice. By the time the session ended, Rebecca felt both drained and invigorated. The teens had listened to her, and some had even seemed to warm to her by the end of the hour. But she knew that this was only the beginning. If she wanted to make a real impact, she would need to commit to this, fully. As the teens dispersed, Jenny approached Rebecca, her expression thoughtful. You did well, she said. They seemed to appreciate what you had to say. Rebecca smiled, feeling a small sense of pride. I hope so. They're great kids. They just need someone to believe in them. Jenny nodded, her eyes softening slightly. That's what we're trying to do here. Give them the support they need to believe in themselves. There was a pause, and then Jenny looked at Rebecca with an intensity that made her heart race. This isn't going to be easy for you, Rebecca. Helping these kids isn't like running a business. It takes patience, and you're going to have to be here for the long haul if you want to make a difference. Rebecca met her gaze, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. I know, and I'm ready for that. Jenny studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's see how it goes. As Rebecca left the youth center that afternoon, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about proving herself to Jenny or fixing her image. For the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt like she was doing something that mattered, something real. And that feeling was more powerful than any business success she had ever known. Over the following weeks, Rebecca found herself returning to the Riverside Youth Center regularly. Each time she walked through the doors, she felt a little less out of place and a little more connected to the purpose of the center. She spent hours with the teens, helping them with everything from career planning to interview skills, but also listening to their stories and learning about their lives. The more time she spent with them, the more she began to realize how much she had in common with these kids, despite the vast differences in their circumstances. Mia, who had been guarded and skeptical during their first meeting, gradually began to open up. She still had a tough exterior, but Rebecca saw glimpses of vulnerability in her, a desire to make something of herself, but a fear that she would never get the chance. One afternoon, after a particularly intense career workshop, Mia approached Rebecca as she was packing up her things. I've been thinking, Mia said, her arms crossed as usual, but her tone less combative. You said you didn't come from money, but you still made it. How did you do it? Like, really? Rebecca paused, surprised by the directness of the question. She set down her bag and turned to face Mia fully. It wasn't easy, she admitted. When I was your age, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I knew I didn't want to stay where I was. I got a scholarship to college, but even then, I had to work multiple jobs to pay for the rest. I started in real estate because I thought it was the quickest way to make money, but it wasn't until years later that I realized I had lost sight of what really mattered. Mia's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Rebecca took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. I got so focused on success, on proving myself, that I started treating people like they didn't matter. I was willing to do whatever it took to get to the top, and I hurt a lot of people along the way. Mia studied her for a moment, her expression thoughtful. So why are you here? Why are you helping us? Rebecca smiled softly, feeling the truth settle in her chest. Because I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to help people, not hurt them. And maybe by helping you, I can make up for some of the mistakes I've made. Mia didn't say anything for a long moment, but Rebecca could see that her words had struck a chord. Finally, Mia gave a small nod. All right, we'll see. It wasn't an endorsement, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt like she was on the right path, not just for her career, but for her soul. At Sterling Enterprises, the changes in Rebecca's personal life began to reflect in her leadership style. She started to take a more hands-on approach with her employees, asking for feedback from all levels of the company and making a genuine effort to connect with the people who worked for her. Her assistant, Emily, noticed the change almost immediately and, while initially cautious, began to warm up to the new Rebecca. One afternoon, Rebecca called an all-staff meeting, something she hadn't done in years. Standing in front of her employees, she felt a mixture of nerves and determination. This was her chance to show them that she was committed to change. Good afternoon, everyone, Rebecca began, her voice carrying through the large conference room. I know this meeting is a little unusual, but I wanted to take some time to talk to all of you, not just about the company, but about how we can work together moving forward. There were murmurs of curiosity throughout the room, and Rebecca felt the eyes of her staff on her, waiting to see what she would say next. In the past, I've made some mistakes, she continued, her tone sincere. I've been so focused on growing this company and staying ahead of the competition that I lost sight of what really matters, our people. I've treated some of you unfairly, and for that, I'm sorry. The murmurs quieted, and Rebecca saw the surprise on her employees' faces. Apologies from CEOs were rare, and she knew this one was long overdue. I'm committed to changing how we do things here at Sterling Enterprises, Rebecca went on. I want to create an environment where everyone feels valued, where every voice is heard. That starts with me. If any of you have concerns or ideas about how we can improve, I'm here to listen. The silence in the room was palpable, and for a moment Rebecca wondered if her words had fallen flat. But then one of her employees, a woman from the marketing department, raised her hand. I appreciate what you're saying, Miss Sterling, the woman said. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge that things haven't always been perfect. I think if you're serious about this, we can really make Sterling Enterprises a place people want to work. Rebecca smiled, feeling a sense of relief. I am serious, and I'm counting on all of you to help me make that happen. As the meeting ended and the employees filed out of the room, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she was beginning to see the possibility of real change, not just for her company, but for herself. A few months into her work at the youth center, Rebecca received a message that both surprised and unnerved her. Tom Caldwell wanted to meet with her. After everything that had happened, she had assumed that the partnership with Caldwell's Bistro was off the table for good. She hadn't heard from Tom since their last conversation, and she had accepted that she might never regain his trust. But now, as she sat at a small cafe waiting for Tom to arrive, she wondered what had changed. Had he heard about her work at the youth center? Was he giving her another chance? When Tom finally walked in, he greeted her with a polite nod before sitting down across from her. His expression was calm, but Rebecca could sense cautiousness in his demeanor. Thank you for meeting with me, Tom, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. Tom nodded, folding his hands on the table. I've been hearing some interesting things about you lately, Rebecca. Rebecca felt her heart skip a beat. Oh, Jenny mentioned that you've been working with the youth center, Tom continued, and from what I hear, you've been making an effort to change how you run your company as well. Rebecca nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. I've been trying. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm doing my best to fix them. Tom studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. I wasn't sure if you'd stick with it, he admitted, but it seems like you're serious about this. Rebecca took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. I am. I don't want to be the person I was before. Tom nodded slowly. I appreciate that, Rebecca, and I can see that you're putting in the effort. But this isn't just about what you've done in the past few months. It's about whether or not I can trust you moving forward. Rebecca's chest tightened. I understand. Tom leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. I'm willing to reconsider our partnership, he said, his voice measured. But it's going to be a small project, something low profile, just to see how we work together. If it goes well, we can talk about more in the future. Rebecca felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't the grand partnership she had once envisioned, but it was a start, a second chance. I'd be honored, Tom, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. Tom gave her a small nod. We'll see how it goes. As they finished their meeting and Tom left the cafe, Rebecca sat for a moment, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. She had been given another chance, not just with Tom, but with herself, and this time she wouldn't waste it. The partnership with Caldwell's Bistro was modest, just a small community project to renovate a historic building and turn it into a space for local businesses. But for Rebecca, it was everything. It was a chance to prove that she could work with integrity, that she could lead without arrogance, and that she could rebuild the trust she had once shattered. The project involved collaborating with local contractors, community leaders, and city officials. It wasn't the high-stakes, glamorous deal Rebecca was used to, but she found herself more invested in it than she had been in any project for years. The work was tangible, meaningful, and deeply connected to the community. Tom was cautious in their interactions, but Rebecca could sense that he was warming to her, slowly but surely. They worked together as equals, discussing design plans and budget allocations, and Rebecca made sure to show him and everyone else involved that she was fully committed to the project's success. At the same time, Rebecca's efforts at Sterling Enterprises were beginning to bear fruit. The changes she had implemented were starting to have a noticeable impact on company culture. Employees who had once felt alienated and undervalued were now engaging in open dialogue with their managers. Productivity was up, and there was a renewed sense of loyalty among the staff. But Rebecca knew that her work wasn't done. She still had a long way to go, both personally and professionally. The climb back up from the mistakes she had made wasn't about reclaiming power or status. It was about regaining her sense of self, her integrity, and her ability to connect with others. One afternoon, as Rebecca and Tom stood outside the nearly completed building, admiring the progress, Tom turned to her with a thoughtful expression. You've come a long way, Rebecca, he said, his voice steady. I wasn't sure if you could do it, but you've proven me wrong. Rebecca smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Thank you, Tom. I've still got a lot to learn, but I'm trying. Tom nodded. That's all anyone can ask for. As they walked through the building, discussing the final touches for the project, Rebecca felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had been searching for, not the superficial success she had once chased, but something deeper, more meaningful. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the right path. Rebecca Sterling's confidence had been building steadily over the months. She had thrown herself into the partnership project with Caldwell's Bistro, helping turn a dilapidated historic building into a thriving community center. Her work at the Riverside Youth Center was equally rewarding, and her efforts at Sterling Enterprises had started to repair the company's strained internal culture. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt that she was becoming the person she had once aspired to be. Strong but compassionate, driven but considerate. However, just when she thought things were finally falling into place, disaster struck. It started with a phone call. Rebecca was in her office at Sterling Enterprises, going over the final budget reports for the community center project, when her assistant Emily knocked on the door, her expression tense. Ms. Sterling, Emily said, stepping inside cautiously. There's something you need to see. It's all over the news. Rebecca's brow furrowed. What's happened? Emily hesitated, then handed her a tablet with a news article pulled up on the screen. The headline hit Rebecca like a punch to the gut. Sterling Enterprises under fire for unethical practices in housing development scandal. Rebecca's hands tightened on the edges of the tablet as she read the article. An investigative journalist had uncovered evidence that a major housing development project led by Sterling Enterprises years ago had involved unethical practices, specifically displacing low-income families without adequate compensation. The deal had been lucrative for the company, but now it is being exposed as a prime example of corporate exploitation. Rebecca's heart pounded as she skimmed the article. The development in question had taken place during a particularly aggressive growth phase for Sterling Enterprises. It had been spearheaded by James Bartlett, one of her former executives, but Rebecca had signed off on it without asking too many questions. At the time, it seemed like a solid business move. Now it looked like a time bomb waiting to explode. It's all over social media too, Emily said softly. People are calling for an investigation. It's not just your name. It's the company. Rebecca felt the walls closing in around her. After all her efforts to rebuild her reputation, this scandal threatened to destroy everything. She had changed, hadn't she? But now her past decisions are coming back to haunt her in the worst possible way. How bad is it? Rebecca asked, her voice tight. Emily hesitated. It's bad. Stock prices are already dropping. The press is reaching out for a statement. The board is going to want answers. Rebecca closed her eyes, trying to gather her thoughts. She had known that the aggressive tactics she'd used in the past might catch up with her, but she hadn't expected it to happen now. Not when she was finally starting to feel like she was on the right track. We'll need a crisis team, Rebecca said after a long pause. Get me to our PR department and schedule an emergency board meeting. I'll address this head on. Emily nodded and quickly left the room, leaving Rebecca alone with the weight of the scandal bearing down on her. She stared at the headline on the screen, feeling a sinking sense of dread. This wasn't just about her company, it was about her, the person she had been, the person who had made those decisions without considering the consequences, was still part of her story, and now she had to face it. The board meeting later that afternoon was tense. Mark Turner, who had been vocal about his concerns over Rebecca's leadership in the past, led the charge, his face a mixture of frustration and barely concealed panic. We're hemorrhaging money, Rebecca, Mark said, his voice sharp. Stock prices are down nearly 15%, and our investors are calling for answers. How did this happen? How did this slip through the cracks? Rebecca remained composed, but inside her thoughts were racing. The project in question took place several years ago, she explained. It was part of our rapid expansion strategy at the time. Bartlett oversaw the deal, but I signed off on it. I take full responsibility. You're damn right you take responsibility, Mark shot back. This is on you, Rebecca. You can't just throw Bartlett under the bus. The company's name is at stake, and right now the public sees Sterling Enterprises as a symbol of corporate greed. Rebecca met his gaze, refusing to back down. I'm not deflecting blame. I know that I made decisions back then that I wouldn't make now, but I'm committed to fixing this. I'm not the same person I was when that deal was made, and neither is this company. Mark wasn't satisfied. We can't afford to wait for your personal redemption arc, Rebecca. We need immediate damage control, or this company is going under. The other board members murmured in agreement, and Rebecca felt the pressure mounting. She had spent months rebuilding her reputation, working to regain the trust of her employees, her peers, and the people she had hurt. Now it felt like all of that was unraveling in front of her. I'm handling it, Rebecca said, her voice firm. We're launching a full internal investigation into the development deal. We'll cooperate with any legal inquiries and make reparations to the affected communities. I'm not going to hide from this. Reparations, Mark scoffed. Do you have any idea how much that will cost? This company can't afford to hemorrhage any more money right now. Rebecca stood, her resolve hardening. We can't afford not to. If we don't take responsibility and make this right, we'll lose more than money. We'll lose our integrity, what little we have left. I'm not going to let that happen. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Mark glared at her, but Rebecca didn't waver. This was her test, the moment when she would either stand by the changes she had committed to, or fall back into the ruthless, cutthroat tactics that had defined her past. Finally, Mark exhaled and sat back in his chair. "Fine," he said grudgingly. "But you'd better pray this works, Rebecca, because if it doesn't, we're done." Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. It will work. But as she left the boardroom, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her. This wasn't just about saving her company, it was about proving that she had truly changed, and that was going to be the hardest challenge of all. That evening, Rebecca called an emergency meeting with her crisis management team and her PR department. As they worked late into the night crafting statements and preparing a strategy to deal with the media storm, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in her chest. This scandal threatened everything she had worked for, and the public wasn't going to be forgiving. She knew that she couldn't fix this with a carefully worded statement or a quick PR move. This time it required real action, action that would hurt her bottom line, but that was the price she had to pay if she wanted to regain the public's trust. The next morning, Rebecca held a press conference in front of Sterling Enterprises headquarters. She stood before a sea of reporters, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust in her direction. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but she took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I'm Rebecca Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, and I'm here today to take full responsibility for the mistakes my company made in the housing development project that has come to light." The reporters leaned in, eager for more, but Rebecca remained composed. "When this project was approved, I was focused on expanding the company, and I failed to properly assess the impact it would have on the communities involved," she continued. "Because of that, I am deeply sorry. Sterling Enterprises has always prided itself on its commitment to excellence, but in this case, we fell short of our own standards." Rebecca paused, letting her words sink in before moving on. "But I don't just want to apologize. I want to take action. Sterling Enterprises will be conducting a full internal review of all our past projects to ensure that no other communities were harmed by our actions. We will also be working with local organizations to provide reparations to the families affected by housing development. This is not just about fixing a mistake. It's about doing what's right." The reporters' questions came fast and furious after that, asking about the specifics of the reparations plan, the financial impact on the company, and whether Rebecca herself would be stepping down as CEO. She answered each question as best as she could, maintaining her composure, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her. When the press conference ended, Rebecca returned to her office, feeling both exhausted and relieved. She had taken responsibility. She had faced the consequences of her past actions. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The public and her board would be watching closely to see if she could follow through on her promises. The weeks following the press conference were some of the most challenging of Rebecca's life. The scandal had taken a serious toll on Sterling Enterprises. Stock prices remained volatile, investors were skittish, and the media continued to scrutinize every move Rebecca made. But through it all, she remained steadfast in her commitment to make things right. True to her word, Rebecca spearheaded the internal review of the company's past projects, working closely with legal and ethical compliance teams to ensure that any other missteps were addressed. She met with community leaders and advocacy groups, listening to their concerns and collaborating with them to develop a plan for reparations. It was grueling work, and it wasn't the kind of effort that earned quick public approval. But Rebecca wasn't doing it for applause. Her interactions with the affected communities were some of the most humbling experiences of her life. She met with families who had been displaced by housing development, heard their stories, and witnessed firsthand the pain her company had caused. For the first time in her career, Rebecca wasn't focused on profits or expansion. She was focused on making amends, on doing something that mattered. Tom Caldwell had watched her progress with quiet interest. He had been skeptical at first, unsure if Rebecca's transformation was genuine or simply a strategic move to salvage her career. But as the weeks went by, he began to see something in her that he hadn't expected, an unwavering commitment to do the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it cost her personally. One afternoon, as Rebecca was reviewing proposals for community housing projects, her phone rang. It was Tom. "Rebecca," he said, his voice steady. I think it's time we talked. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. Of course, Tom. What's on your mind? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Tom spoke. I've been watching what you've been doing. The reparations, the review. You've gone further than I thought you would. I meant what I said, Tom, Rebecca replied. I'm committed to fixing this, no matter how long it takes. I can see that, Tom said, and I think it's time we reconsidered our partnership. Rebecca felt a surge of relief and hope. After everything that had happened, after all the setbacks and mistakes, she had earned her way back, not through force, but through integrity. I'd be honored, Tom, Rebecca said softly. Tom's tone was warm but measured. It won't be easy, Rebecca. This is still a tough situation, but I believe in second chances. The call ended, and as Rebecca sat back in her chair, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in years. She had fought her way back from the brink, not through manipulation or power plays, but by confronting her mistakes and doing the hard work of redemption. Months passed, and the reparations initiative, along with the community housing project, began to take shape. Sterling Enterprises had taken a financial hit, but Rebecca was willing to sacrifice short-term profits for long-term integrity. Her employees began to rally behind her efforts, seeing firsthand the changes she was implementing, not just in the company, but in herself. Her work at the youth center also continued to bring her fulfillment. The teens who had once been wary of her now sought her out for advice, and she found herself more invested in their futures than ever. The mentorship program became a personal mission for Rebecca, one that reminded her every day of why she had chosen this new path. One afternoon, as she walked through the newly renovated Sterling Caldwell Community Center, she spotted Mia, now a senior in high school, leading a workshop for younger students. Mia had grown into a confident, driven young woman, and Rebecca couldn't have been prouder of her. Miss Sterling, Mia called out, waving her over. Come meet the next generation of leaders. Rebecca chuckled and made her way over to the group. I'm not sure I have much to teach you anymore, Mia. You've got it covered. Mia grinned, her eyes bright with excitement. You've taught me plenty. Now it's my turn. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, Rebecca felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come a long way from the arrogant, power-hungry CEO she had once been. She had lost much along the way, her reputation, her certainty, but in the process, she had gained something far more valuable. That evening, Tom and Jenny Caldwell joined Rebecca at the community center for the grand opening celebration. The three of them stood together, watching as families and children filled the space with laughter and joy. It was a moment of triumph, not just for the project, but for the journey they had all been on. You did good, Rebecca, Tom said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. This place, it's a real legacy. Rebecca smiled, her heart full. It's our legacy, Tom, and it's just the beginning. As they stood there watching the community they had helped build, Rebecca knew that she had finally found the kind of success that mattered not in wealth or power, but in the lives she had touched and the people she had helped along the way. For the first time in her life, she was truly content. As they stood there, watching the community they had helped build, Rebecca knew that she had finally found the kind of success that mattered not in wealth or power, but in the lives she had touched and the people she had helped along the way. For the first time in her life, she was truly content. If you found Rebecca's journey inspiring and enjoyed watching her transformation from corporate titan to a woman of compassion and integrity, make sure to subscribe for more stories of redemption, growth, and the power of second chances. Don't miss the next heartwarming story. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when new stories drop. You won't want to miss what's coming next.